Well, welcome everyone. This is Judy Flagg and I'm Elizabeth Cockey. And we're here today to discuss Historic Washington County, a photographic portrait.
This is a book that we have put together over the past 2.5 years. I believe it took us that long. And
we started 2.5 years ago with the idea. We were doing a museum exhibition on mills industry on the rivers in Washington County. And what happened was we had so many people want to tell stories about their experiences on the rivers or in industry or in the area in general, that we thought we need to expand from industry. And what about doing a book of photographs, historical photographs about the county, how things used to be?
Right, we had many people that wanted to share their stories, and through these photographs, you will see that we came to find out a lot about the history of Washington County. The pictures in our book represent all 17 towns in Washington County, and we'll begin with our first slide. Okay, this is actually a parade in the village of Salem, and it is the Firemens Parade. Back in the early 1900s, there were firemen's conventions for the 3-county area: Warren County, Washington County, and Saratoga County. The firemen's conventions would have parades in the different neighborhoods. All of the fire companies would come dressed in their parade finest and march with their marching bands in front of the very admiring crowds that lined the tree-lined streets.
This was back in the day when they actually celebrated things. I haven't seen a parade for a long time.
And they were very patriotic.
They were very patriotic. You would see bunting and flags, and people would get dressed up, and there'd be a huge turnout. People loved to celebrate together.
Next slide, please. This is in Putnam, New York. This is Bain's General Store, about the year 1945. This is William Bain and Margaret Bain, his wife, sitting on the front porch of their general store.
And there's a bird in a cage that's, we suspect, was a parrot that used to be in the store, and the parrot would swear like a trooper, we're told, when people came in. But the thing about this photograph, and many photographs in the book, is that some of them were taken earlier on in the late 1800s, and they were more formal. They were like taken on tripods with a box camera, and photographers would come around the county, and people would sit out in front of their places, just like these people are, although this was later, and they would bring their horses and their dogs and grandma and everybody, and they'd take more of a formal portrait. Later, after Kodak invented roll film and smaller cameras, individuals would take more candid shots.
And of course, that's what this one is. This one shows the Bains, as I said, the community stores at that time, and really late into the 1900s, really were the community centers in all of the hamlets in Washington County. There was always a community center. Maybe there was a post office there. They would serve as meeting places for people sharing stories and telling tales.
People gathered. Okay, next slide.
This one is kind of a mysterious picture for us. We know it was in Granville about 1910. What this wagon represents, we're not exactly sure. We think it's a work wagon because you'll notice that there are 3 rows of seats in this wagon, pulled by a bedraggled looking team of horses.
But the horses have on a harness that was to
it's called a fly guard.
A fly guard, so that the flies would flap when they walked, and it would keep the flies off them.
As you know, horse flies can be pretty annoying.
Yeah.
But we just wonder whether this was a work crew. We found other pictures from Granville here from the Slate Valley Museum that showed workers like this working either in the quarries or on street paving or bricklaying expeditions. And we just wonder whether that is something that maybe this particular work of this group of men was doing. We're not really sure. So maybe somebody could help us with that.
Yeah. I don't think they've started yet. They look pretty clean. Okay, next slide.
These are the Hicks brothers who owned the Hicks Orchard in Granville. And they owned that orchard from 1906 until 1974.
And around this time, they were starting to use spray, DDT, to spray apples. And that was the first time they were using chemicals, strong chemicals to retard infestations. Of course, today it's pretty much insane with Modera and all those places with Roundup, all those farming practices that are pretty dangerous.
And of course, this orchard is still in existence. The Wilson family owns this orchard now. And it is a very popular pick your own orchard, still in existence.
I think they still spray too. Hampton House. These gentlemen are all in the middle of
Having a good time.
Yes, they're having a good time, and they've brought the horse out with them.
And if you can see, they've got the jugs on there. It looks like we've got jugs of whiskey or whatever moonshine might be offered at the Hampton House. This was a place, a tavern that is now on what's called Campbell Lane. I don't believe that the building any longer exists, but as we say, the men were certainly having a good time for themselves.
It's hard to even figure out where Hampton is anymore. Okay, next slide. Mary McClellan Hospital. This is another entity that is also in ruin, rack and ruin, and used to be where a lot of people in the county were born, actually.
Yes, and many of them worked
there.
It was completed, the building of this was completed in 1919. It took 3 years to build this hospital, which was built by Edwin McClellan and named in honor of his mother, Mary McClellan. And it was a very busy and important part of the community.
And his wife started a school for nursing there, which I believe I think you can see it in this picture. I cannot see. There's an image in the middle of that picture.
I don't know if that's something that Wendy can remove so that
Can
we
you
can see
remove
the
that,
picture.
Wendy, so we can see the picture?
We have something that's, no, she can't. So, but we hope we're telling you the truth about this picture. We can't really see it.
We can't see it.
Okay, this is Dr. Asa Pitch Jr. and his wife and his oldest son. Dr. Asa Pitch was quite a remarkable man. He lived in the town of Salem at what is now called Fitch's Point. And he was a physician, just as his father was before him. But he also was an inventor of some of the chemicals we were talking about to rid of noxious insects, especially the potato beetle. He invented a chemical called Paris green.
He's got some insects with him there, isn't there?
Yes, those are butterflies. So I think those
apparently
are
killed
pretty,
them
those are
successfully.
noxious.
Yeah, they're very noxious. He's killed them successfully and has mounted them.
Yes, he was actually called the bug catcher of Salem. And he went on to great fame, really, as an entomologist. He became the first New York State entomologist. But also, to his credit, he was very interested in local history and collected many genealogies and stories, early stories about Washington County. He compiled all of these manuscript notes, and he was hoping to prepare a history of Washington County, but he died at age 70 before he completed that task.
So we've taken up the banner.
Yes,
Okay.
we got ours done before we
did.
died. That's
Yeah,
for
we did.
sure.
All right, next. Oh, this little guy, I love this little kid. This little boy, this is during the Depression. This is William Huntington, and he's still alive. He's in his 90s. And this is what we found was so interesting is a lot of the pictures taken in the 30s during the Depression are of children. And this is a child in the 30s. So next. This is my grandmother and my great-grandmother in a formal photograph. Fanny and Julia Stevens from the town of Jackson. Next.
This was the dedication of Burton Hall in Easton. This was in 1901. And the Burton Hall was built by banker, and I'll tell you his name in a minute, Isaac Burton. who gave all of the money for the building of this building, and it was created for a community center. It had the public offices, the town library was there, and pretty much today it still serves as a community center.
It sure looks like everyone from the community was there that day.
And dressed in
doesn't
their
it?
finest.
In their finest. Yeah, you'll see people in this book that they're working. They go to the factory, the mills, farms. They're dressed up. They don't, they look like,
When they come out in public, they have
Yeah.
on their
Yep,
best.
they do. Fort Miller, Main Street. What year was this?
And this was about it was before 1914, because we know that hotel, which is the Riverside Hotel, which is there on the left-hand side of your screen, burned in 1914. So obviously it was prior to that. Before it was a hotel, that had been a girls' school or private school. And the little boy on the bicycle, we know him to be Fred Jakeway.
Okay, next slide.
These are the Jay Gould houses in Middle Granville. Jay Gould was known as one of the robber barons. He also owned one of the quarries in Middle Granville.
And these were built right in front of where the quarries are today. Only one house remains today, and it's rather,
It's painted bright blue.
it's
know
painted
who
bright
owns it.
blue. So if you drive by on Route 22,
You'll see where this house was, and there was a whole
It's
row of
actually
these houses.
22A,
22A.
22A,
Mhm.
and that's the only house that's still standing.
But we wonder about these, whether they were built for a particular ethnic group. I don't know that. Someone maybe from Granville would know the answer to that. If there were a certain ethnic group that worked in the Jay Gould quarry. These houses appear to be duplexes. You come in that front entrance, each one of them has that entrance on the front, and it looks as if there's two doors that go to two separate sides of the house. So I'd like to know a little bit more about these houses if someone has that information.
Okay, next slide.
This is Broadway in Fort Edward, about 1925. It's typical of many of the main streets in the villages throughout Washington County. You'll see the street is brick lined.
But you'll also see, and I think you can see it in here, it's hard to see on the screen, trolley tracks will be in the middle of the road, and the cars would drive on either side of that, and you can see cars.
Right, you'll see the trolley here in this picture with people boarding. But it's very typical, as I say, of what main streets were like in all of the villages.
Next.
Another main street. This is Sandy Hill, which is today called Hudson Falls. And in this one, we can date this one quite specifically because there is a banner across the street for the Democratic nomination of Grover Cleveland.
Judy, I have a question. Why did they call it Hudson Falls
Well,
from
because
Sandy Hill?
I don't know why they decided to change the name, but of course it's the Hudson River is right there, very important. And there's a huge falls, which created much of the power for the industries that were there in Sandy Hill / Hudson Falls.
Okay. Country Life. This is in Salem.
Shushan, actually.
Shushan, part of Salem.
Yes. And this is the Workey family. It shows the creativity of early farm families. There was a jalopy, an old car that they had, which they developed into a hay towing machine. And you'll see the Workey brothers here. There's Tauno, who's driving the jalopy. His brothers Olavi and Turi are also helping. And looks like the mother's directing traffic. But the Workeys arrived in Shushan along with many other Finnish families in the 1930s. And they settled in Shushan. They were brought there by his name, Keski, who had the store in Shushan, really acted as an agent for many of the Finnish families who came out of the New York City area and moved up to Shushan.
They had nothing. They worked hard, and they got somewhere because of hard work and determination. Anyway, next. I'm seeing a strange signal on the bottom there.
with stripes. And
with
colors.
stripes.
We're talking to our technical advisor over here, so in case you're wondering why we're talking to Wendy. Okay, we'll just keep talking. Hope that you're hearing this.
Hope that you're seeing this.
And that too.
Major the horse. Major got in here because one of our good friends told us the story about Major, which was not just a workhorse, but the family pet. And I just thought that was so endearing to, that they loved their animals. And you often see pictures of folks with their animals. And this was taken in 1899. And this lady,
Ethel Ray Reed, who's the little baby sitting on her mother's lap.
She never really got much farther than like 3 miles.
She lived to be 103.
Yeah.
And she only lived about 3 miles from her home.
Yeah, she did.
This is during the Depression, but farmers markets were common back then as well. Farmers would bring their produce to community centers where there were farmers markets. Here in this particular one, you can see potatoes and apples. It's probably in the fall of the year because there's no leaves on the trees. And people are pretty well bundled up, but they brought their eggs, milk, whatever they had to buy or offer, and people would come and purchase. You'll see here the chief of police is also in this picture, and also the mayor.
It must have been a kind of a photo op.
Could be. They're all lined up, aren't they?
Okay. This is bringing milk, cans of milk. They used to farmers would put milk in cans, and they'd put them in coolers, lead lined coolers.
Mhm.
And then everyone had a number on their can, so you'd know when they got it to the factory, creamery, whose milk was whose, and that's how you got paid.
This particular gentleman is John Lytle, and he lived on the Blindbuck Road in Salem. And on the other end of Blindbuck Road, which is the cover of our book, by the way, is the Morehouse Cheese Factory. So we suspect that he was hauling his milk to that cheese factory in 1910.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, there it is.
There's the cheese
There's
factory
the
right
cheese
there,
factory. And
of
that
which
is
we speak.
It was on Blindbuck Road in Salem. And as I said, Mr. Lytle lived on the other end of this road. But we really love this picture. This is why we chose it for the cover. It just shows so much that's typical of Washington County.
It was Judy's idea.
It was Judy's idea, but
We had a lot of photographs we could have selected, but I think this was the best one because it really does show Washington County, farms, industry, trees,
the
fields,
rolling hills,
everything.
yeah, it was just, yep.
Okay, next. I love this one because all the guys look like the same person looking out the window.
Yeah, it does look like cookie cutters. Each window looks like it has the same man. This is the Hellfinger brothers Pottery in Fort Edward. And they had contracts with local 10-cent stores, Kresge's and Woolworths, to provide clay pots, clay flower pots. And the clay was right there from the Hudson River banks too. So everything that they needed was provided locally.
These same crocks are worth a lot of money now.
Oh yeah.
You can buy a small crock that's not too big, maybe 2 gallons, for about $250.
If you'll notice, there's one in the second story window, I believe, that's propping the window open. I'm thinking, wow, that thing's probably worth about $400 today.
If you could find it. Next.
This is Slate Cutting in Granville. Just one of the many, many pictures that we found showing the men hard at work in the quarries. But even though work was very difficult in those days, there was the social aspect of it. People worked together to create whatever it was they were trying to produce.
And there wasn't like unemployment checks. So they had to, if you didn't work, you didn't eat, basically. So they were inspired.
They were inspired. They worked hard, and many of them arrived here as immigrants and made success of themselves, and their children were educated and went on to great things.
Yeah, well, the reason that they came here was because even though it was hard, it was a lot better than where they'd come from.
True. The opportunities certainly were here, and they abounded.
Next. Okay, the Fort Miller Company, this was purchased by a gentleman named Ollie Hedring in 1947. And they made concrete vaults, which interestingly. Burial vaults. And he didn't really know that much about the concrete business, but he took a chance and he bought the company. And today, some 50, 60, 70 years later, his son John runs the Fort Miller Group, and they are a very successful company, employing many individuals, over 500 individuals from around the local county.
And they create some massive structures, which we've probably all seen. They provided the decking, the concrete decking for the Tappan Zee Bridge, which now I think is renamed, but we don't need to go there. But it was the Tappan Zee Bridge, and I still call it the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Right.
The glove factory. Now this building still exists too. It's now the hardware store on Church Street.
And that room still looks pretty much the same, minus the people being in it. But yeah, that's they used to shower up there, and they didn't have when they came to Granville, a lot of the workers didn't have running water or anything like that, so they'd shower up here.
I think too they had social gatherings. I think they told us that they had potluck dinners and dances they would put on. But this big long table, which ran the entire length of that room, still exists. Kyle Hunter took me upstairs to show me this, and it's incredible how it's still pretty much intact. Obviously, it was before 1920. We think it's about 1913 because the women still have their hair up on top of their heads, and they're working diligently sewing those gloves.
Okay, next. Transportation. They have a flat tire in this picture. That often happened. They would patch it with, I remember having patch kits for your bicycle tires. I think they had the same thing here. You see
how creative they are. They didn't have a jack, so they've got a pile of rocks.
They found rocks, pile it up, away they go.
Very clever.
Yeah. Next.
This is the Barge Canal, very important to the industry in Washington County when this Barge Canal opened. This is a picture taken at Comstock about 1910, and you can see the barge there in the water. And on the right-hand side of the picture is a hotel, which at one time, believe it or not, was on the other side of the canal, and they moved it from one side to the other.
That was no small task. How deep do you think the canal was? Not too deep.
I don't think it was too deep because the barges, of course, were flat bottom. So
yeah.
The Bricklayers. Now, this could be possibly that work crew that was in that wagon before.
Now they're working.
Now they're working, and they are laying the bricks for one of the brick streets in Granville. I'm not sure which one. I bet people in Granville would be able to identify that building in the background.
Brick streets would have been a really good thing back then because otherwise it was dirt.
Muddy ruts.
And it was muddy, and of course there would be horse manure and things in the streets, and golly knows what else might have been thrown there, but the brick really made a huge difference to carriages.
And I wonder too whether these bricks might have been provided by there was a pepper brick factory, which was in Middle Granville. These bricks may have been made there and brought here to the street to be. So
these would have been fired bricks, not sun cured, right?
I think they were all adobe style bricks. I don't think they were fired, but I'm not sure. I'm not positive of that. This is one of the ferries crossing Lake Champlain from Putnam over to Benson, Vermont. And Roy Herrick, who is the gentleman there on the right-hand side of the picture, he is the captain of that.
So the
ferry.
trees on the other side are in Vermont.
Are in Vermont.
Correct?
We're facing, yes. We're
If
facing
you've
Vermont.
never had a chance to get up to Putnam, do so. It's absolutely gorgeous there. And in Dresden too. Yeah, really beautiful. Fire.
We have a whole chapter on fires.
We have a whole chapter on fires for a reason.
Yes, we do.
We had no idea. There are so many fires. Well, of course, they had open flame. Most of these fires happened in the winter.
Of course, many times earlier, even lighting was provided by gas lights. They had fires that were open pits. Many of the industries had huge furnaces that ran with fire. And once they got started,
They kept going.
they just kept going until they burned themselves out.
In fact, one building in Greenwich, the Hill Block building, burned twice.
Mhm.
You know, many years apart, but it burned twice and finally lost the top floor.
But we were really taken with this picture. It shows,
Yeah.
obviously it must have been winter, because the icicles are just hanging from the telegraph wires. And
Yeah, but as I was saying, a lot of the fires were in winter, and it was like quite a remarkable difference between fire, flame, and then black people, the black images of people, and then
soot and
trees,
smoke, and then the
and
ice.
smoke, and then ice. Yeah. This is my family's farm, and this was struck by lightning in summer. It's the one photograph we found, not in the winter. And I was alive at that time, so figure out how old I am.
But this was a natural.
This was a natural, yeah.
Fire,
I
yeah.
remember seeing lightning come out of the sky and strike the barn, and it burned to the ground. They used water from the Battenkill River to put out the fire and save the house. They didn't save the barn, but they saved the house. The Rough and Ready in Greenwich, early
Yes.
1900s.
Mhm. This building still exists. It's on Eddy Street in Greenwich. It's a private residence now. It's just over just on the eastern side in the village of Greenwich.
The building's still there.
The building's still there, yes. These cadets are out in front of the, what is it called? This was called the North Granville Military Academy. And it was opened in 1876. These cadets were all in their fine uniforms. One of the advertisements for the academy read, "It is free from the temptation of larger towns." So
Whatever that means.
send
You
your
couldn't go out and
boys
get
here.
drunk in Hampton anymore.
Send your boys to
Yeah.
North Granville.
And this is a school
Very typical of the
Yeah.
one-room schoolhouses.
in Argyle.
Every township had a number of one-room schoolhouses.
Again, this is another probably posed shot, since they're all outside in the winter, and they probably said, come on outside, we're gonna take
Have
a
your picture
picture.
taken.
Yeah.
This is the Bancroft Library. Actually, it was my first job out of college, was to be the librarian. at the
Judy's
Ban-
really old.
I'm really old. Wasn't in 1890, but it was a few years.
Yes, it was. She's lying about it.
But you'll notice here when this is probably when it was first opened, and you'll notice that there probably are gas lights there hanging from the ceiling.
And this burned too,
This burned too.
although we don't have a picture of that fire.
That was
but
in
that
1976, I believe. But you'll notice the railing that's around the outside of the room. That's because the librarian was the only one who was allowed into the stacks with the books. The customers were not allowed to touch the books until they got them in their hands. after
Were they
were
able to
checked
take
out.
them out of the
They
library?
could take them out of the library, but she was the only one that could go into the stacks. The Great Cambridge Fair.
And 40,000 people that's about how many people were actually in the county.
Yeah.
Right? They must have all been there on that day.
Yeah, they were a great attraction for people from coming all over, but I just love looking at the way that people were dressed. The women are in long white dresses
And hats.
and hats.
Must have been hot.
It was hot.
They didn't have deodorant back then, did they? It must have been
So
really,
you had to bring that up.
I did. I wonder about these things.
It's- But you'll see the men too. I mean, they're all dressed up too. Here's a more leisurely look at Washington County. This is on Hedges Lake in the town of Jackson.
And if you look into the background, now it's all, if you're there on Hedges Lake, there's a lot of trees in the background. Now you can see fields and pastures. They had a lot of sheep in the area. And so there wasn't as much forestation back then.
At one time, there
Yes,
was 250,000 sheep.
Actually, there were more than that.
Wow, that's a lot of chewing and stuff, right?
That's a lot of chewing on stuff, yeah.
Begin.